Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Podcast. This is the Back of the Bus session. Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. Today, I am buzzing about this guest. I think I stole the word buzzing off you. You use it a lot. I've stole a lot of words from you, but I am genuinely buzzing about this guest because he's a very good friend, a massive inspiration, and I've got to attribute a lot of what I do to this man for just believing in me. Genuinely, man, I thank you so much for the path you've sent me on, the creative world and wonder. So, welcome aboard. Oh, my arm. Martin Illingworth. Yeah. Thank you. I think out of the 135 guests, you might be the only one to get along with the cheer at the start. I don't think the others get it, but you get it.
Good. Well, thank you for having me back.
Bring in the energy. So, how have you been keeping, man? Because when we last did a podcast, it must have been, did we say about 2 years ago?
I think it was maybe really near the start of COVID.
I think the production's changed, let's say. It feels differently. You were sixth on. I didn't know how to do the sound by that time. I was just working my way around a camera, but I'm very excited about it now because it's going to look and feel Hollywood.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
So let's give some Hollywood content. Now, when we were talking, I think we were going through your other book, which was Think Before You Teach.
Yeah. But
since then, me and you have been on a big journey together. We've been all around the country teaching, not so much because of the C word, the corona times, but we've been teaching anyway, and you wrote a new book called Forget School. Before you go on to that book, can we just talk about your accolades in teaching, your bit of a path? How did you begin teaching? And where are you now with teaching?
I started teaching back in 1991.
I wasn't born then, just to let you know.
No, I interview people now who want to be school teachers, and one of the things that you have to do is do an ID check, and you have to ask them to show you passport or driving license or what have you. It's got the date of birth on, and at the moment we're in a phase of my life where I have to say, I've been teaching 10 years longer than you've been alive and things like that, which is a bit troubling. Good news for them, not such good news for me, I suppose. And I started teaching out at Withensea, which is if you go to Hull and you keep going, before you drop into the North Sea, you arrive at Withensea.
I didn't know there was anything past Hull.
It's about 20 miles of the East Riding, and then you get to Spurn Point, which is at the north side of the Humber Estuary. And if you work your way up from Withensea, you've got Hornsea, you've got Bridlington, you've got Scarborough, and the places become more famous as you go up. And I think I was at Withensea for 7 years, and I think, you know, one of the sort of primary functions of that was to suggest to the young people there that the world might be bigger than it first appeared when you live in a small rural town. And I'm working with a school-centred initial teacher training institution, a skit down in Clacton, down in Essex as well, and I think that serves a similar function because very few people move to Clacton and very few move away. So it's a fairly stable community and one that has to grow its own teachers, if you like. So I've worked in that sort of setting. I've also worked in down the road in Derby, at Woodlands, Alistry, which was a school where, you know, it was basically a university processing centre on the whole.
What year was that you got into Alistry?
I started working there in 1998, and I stayed for 15 years, so I finished in 2013.
Is that where teaching kind of clicked for you? Because I always tell this to people, and honestly, I mention you every other podcast. Must be about the book or just times we've had on the road together. But for some reason, people come to talk to me, and I'll get excited. I'm like, oh, they've seen a poem. Like, no. Do you work with Martin Illingworth? And I'm like, oh, come on, guys. You're breaking me here. But there's so many people in the area that have such a fond and experience and time with you in teaching all around. When I go to schools, I go to the strange, like London and places, and they've seen you. So where did it become that you were an eminent figure as a teacher, and people started noticing you as that sort of figure?
I don't know. That's very kind of you to say that, but
It does happen a lot. Do you get that? Do you have people come up and say, "My mate"?
Yeah, possibly. But it's, you know, as I say, I was there 15 years, so that's a lot of people. 15 years times 200 kids a year.
Yeah.
I can't do the maths, but that's a lot of kids. And yeah, people remember two things from schooling. They remember their teachers and they remember their school trips, I think. Most of the rest of it disappears. But
I hear a lot of negative talking, though, and anecdotes when you hear people reflecting back to their school times. And it's such a refreshing feeling to someone to go, "Oh my God, this teacher changed my world." And
well,
actually
I think you remember your good teachers and your bad teachers, don't you? And I guess that's part of growing up and understanding adults, isn't it? You know, sifting through the ones that you think are, in the case of a school, not a danger to your learning, and the ones that you think are a danger to your learning. And sometimes, maybe I was like this when I went to school. I think I just drifted through school without really understanding there was anything there for me. You know, I just went because that's what you do, because you're a kid.
Yeah.
And that's what kids do. They have to go to school. And that sense that I might be able to take something away from that really didn't click with me. And I think that's probably an important aspect of a teacher making difference, is indicating to kids what the point is, you know, what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what value it might be.
When did that click for you?
Took a while. I mean, you know, as a new teacher, you're presented with the curriculum, with the things that need to be taught, and maybe it took me a good few years before I started challenging what I was being offered, you know, because it's important. The government said we need this, and the exam boards have prepared these materials and these questions and this knowledge base. And for me to actually think, well, about education from the child's perspective rather than the teachers and the establishments, it took quite a long time. And then you get to that sense that actually, how can one set of books and one set of curriculum, one set of ideas fit everybody in the country who's a certain age, you know, because we're still in schools corralling people who are at the same age over a year, and we're giving them the same curriculum. How can that be? How can people in Withensea and in Derby and in Clacton and wherever else, and you think of all the places that we've been, all the schools we've been, right? We've been from the blooming Eden Project to Glasgow, haven't we?
Just come back to the mic a little bit.
Oh,
so,
yeah. And when you think of those places, how can that be? It can't possibly be that, you know. So hopefully you develop the sense that actually I've got to move this curriculum towards the kids. I've got to demonstrate to them its values and on occasion its inadequacies, but I've got to demonstrate why it's worth being here if kids are going to take that sense away.
And did you start incorporating that into your lessons then, and letting the kids know the value of what your lesson was going to give them?
Hopefully, and that's what I ask my trainee teachers to do now, who I'm working with at Sheffield Hallam University. I say, tell the kids why they're here. Tell them what you know, in an hour's time, why it will have been worth being here, what it is that you've learnt, and that it might be something. It might be a new fact.
It's such a simple thing, that is. It's to tell them why. And now you said that, I remember, and looking back onto my experience, we did just turn up, and then you wrote down everything on the board, and you had no idea what it was, what it meant, and then it just began. It's this passive experience.
Well, and you might be taking away different things. It might be a fact. It might be a new skill. You might actually be learning something about yourself.
Yeah.
You know, in this book, quite a few of the young people were talking about the value of group work, which is under a little bit of pressure in schools at the moment. You know, there's sort of more of an emphasis on a teacher standing at the front and delivering content, and children working independently of each other. And you know, there's some quite honest answers about group work in here, about how you know, teachers think that you're not always on task if you're doing group work, and people saying, well, yeah, that's true. You're not always on task, but what you're learning about how people interact.
Yeah. You're
learning the dynamics of a group, and you're learning what your starting position is in a group. You know, if you and I were to go from here and go to a meeting with 8 people, some of those people will be confident, some will be overconfident, some will be shy, some won't speak, so we won't hear their good ideas. Some will dominate and bluster and put down a perfectly good idea. So that sense of networking, which is something that we talk about in this book, is genuinely important. You know, and when you're doing group work, the actual content might be fairly ephemeral. You know, it might be something you discuss, and if you don't write it down, you know, words disappear. They just go into the ether, don't they? And what is remembered from that, it can be quite thin sometimes.
Do you know how many leadership roles there are in terms of how you conduct yourself in a group? I remember in economics or something, we learnt about all the different terms and leadership roles. Do you know any of them, or how many there are?
I'm not an expert on coaching, but you know, there's a difference. There's a distinct difference between leadership and management. You know, managing people is telling them what to do, and making sure everything is organised. Leadership is potentially, particularly for somebody like a teacher, those things I was mentioning before. You know, making people aware of the value of what they're doing has got to be a good starting point.
Making them all feel worth enough in that role.
Yeah, and suggesting that you know, regardless of what job or what function you have in your life, you know, suggesting and promoting its value. You know, I always worry about teachers who say to the kids in the class, "Oh, I don't like doing this, and you don't like doing this, but we've got to do it." You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that what we do is going to be a chore, because you've said it was a chore before we started. And it would be a better trick to discuss maybe the inadequacies of what we're doing, but the value that we can take from those things. That positivity is probably a leadership skill, you know, cajoling people to get on board, to be part of the plan, and actually demonstrate the value to the person themselves, you know, in the case of a school, to the student, in the case of employment of the worker.
So you went from Hull area with your teaching, then you found Alistry, 15 years, and you started noticing things and how the curriculum was just being dished out. You were questioning things. Was there pushback from this? Were people sort of saying, get back in your position, just do what you're doing? And when did, I don't say activism, but when did you start saying, I need to do something about this? And how did that formulate? How did that move itself?
Well, I mean, I guess that was probably a self-awareness on my part, you know, that, I mean, I don't know about you, but in any projects that I've done, there seems to be a shelf life of, you know, where you're, like in my first job, I was there 7 years, and year 6 and 7, perhaps, I was going round the wheel again. And you just find that you need to move on, and you see things, and you develop an expertise or an insight into how things are. And you know, in lots of ways, through the 2000s, education has become more and more formulaic, and particularly in the years where we've had Conservative government, most recently, there's been this sense of control, trying to get control of information, trying to get control of the messages that get out there in schools. And I think it's because governments, schools have lost control of information because children have phones. Children have access to all kinds of media that give them access to the information that they want. So when information has just gone boom, exploded and become democratically available to people, to children in this instance, what I think is happening is a measure of control is being meted out by choosing, in the case of where we're at the minute, British values, whatever that means, but that sort of narrow cultural perspective. And I think it's a fairly natural response to the fact that culture has just gone boom, because people can access information, access news, apart from school, whereas in generations gone by, mine would be a good example, going to school in the late 70s, early 80s, where was I going to find out information? Where was I going to form opinions other than in school? There were no mobile phones, there were no laptops, the library was miles away, there were 4 channels on the television. So, that's where mass media and government have control, or had a tighter control, or less need to control information, because you went to school, that's where you found it. And I think people worry about the way that young people today are less careerist. And there's plenty of young people who are careerists, but at large, people are prepared to do a job for a couple of years and go and do something else, and then go and do a project.
And that's very much what Forget School, your books.
It's about self-employed young people and the way that they are finding their way as young business people. Okay,
so to get into that timeline again then, you were picked up by ITL, is that right? Where you started going off into different schools and looking what they were doing?
And that was a real eye-opener, starting to work for Independent Thinking, which is a gathering of about 50 associates, including yourself, and who run under this general sense that there is another way.
Because that was your philosophy, that working through schools for so long, you started to feel this sense of there is another way.
Or there should be another way. Not that that society had become so disparate, it was moving on at such a pace that actually to have a single momentum to educational curriculum was just not viable. You can't stop a curriculum in time and not expect the world to move on. It just doesn't happen.
Were you still at Alistry at this point as well, and then sort of?
Yes, I was still teaching, and then I did a year. Well, in the spirit of stepping outside of what you do, I applied for a grant from Goldsmiths Institute in London, and this is something that they do every December. They put out the call. So if you feel that you could do this, give it a go. They put out the call for people who want to do some research in education. And they will pay you up to, at the time, it may be more now, but up to £3,000 for you to go and do this research. And I have relatives in Canada, and I'd become interested that in Canada, they don't have exam boards. And teachers write their own exams for the kids.
This sounds amazing.
If you think here, we have We have GCSE exams that are externally marked by the exam board. The schools prepare the kids for the exams. They take the exams. Somebody away from the school marks them. In Canada, at the age of 16, teachers write their own exam papers for the children. And if you, let's say you've got, different types of learners in your classroom, you can write different exams so that their skills can be adequately, so that you're setting up tests and assessment that are genuinely looking at what people can do
on an intimate basis,
rather than being a sorting hat. Because if you think about GCSEs, for you to do well, somebody has to not do well, because otherwise exams lose their function. Because if we all get A star, then there's nothing for society to
base itself on.
Say, right, well, Mikey got an A and Martin got a D, so we'll interview Mikey, right?
Yeah.
That's the basic end point of examinations. Exams can't be the end of your learning, can they? 16, that's me, I'm done with learning, is a ridiculous concept. But it kind of, that's how we've marked off, basic education at 16. But as I say, for you to do well, somebody else has to not do well. And we're all going to do the same test. And that test, because we're all doing the same test, and because people learn in different ways, and increasingly, young people, because of their access to phones and to Netflix and 5,000 channels and laptops and the internet, young people learn increasingly en masse, visually and orally. So, when people are reading, for instance, they'd much rather listen than they would, the sort of the rigours of physically reading text. So exams have become more difficult for young people in those respects, because they're not using their natural abilities as much. So going back to that sense of there must be another way, in this book I propose a model of schooling where there are no physical school buildings. There are still laboratories, there are still libraries, there are workspaces, hubs. And if you think about the adult world, those places are places like coffee houses, aren't they? People go to a coffee house and plug in and do their work there. I think that's stuck.
I love the atmosphere in a coffee house.
And that's really also one of the, that's one of the environments that's stuck since we've been moving back out of COVID. Because people have spent
more so now.
Yeah, people have spent 2 years in their house working, and they're fed up of being in their house all the time.
I love being around people, not wanting to always be talking and communicating, but just being around them and working. So it feels such a comforting environment.
Yeah, so I propose in this book, there are 4 little sequences about a sense of a future school, which is project-based, where you're doing things that actually amount to something. So in one of them, the young people are doing a project. They're investigating why there are no bees in their area, or why bees are dying out. And that, of course, isn't a subject like maths or English or science or information technology. It's all of them.
Yeah.
We're doing a project. We're finding out.
Them.
So we're looking at science. Why are the bees dying? What is it about the environment? We're looking at geography. What can we do about this environment? How can we, end up creating the what is needed for bee colonies to reinvest in the local area? We're doing mathematics. We're doing English. We are having meetings. We are allotting jobs. So often in a piece of schoolwork, everybody does the same work. We all sit down, we read something, and then we all do the same work. But that's not a great use of skills, is it? And if you're developing in one particular way and I'm developing in another, it might be best to use your skills and to use my skills. So the other
rather than just watch one grow up and watch one just sit stagnant and struggle.
And the other thing that I've proposed is that we do away with exams altogether, and instead pupils develop portfolios of what they can do, what their experiences have been, what their levels of acumen are, a record of what they've read, a record of what they've written, a record of the projects that they've been involved with. I mean, speaking to a lot of the young people that I interviewed here who were now in a position in their businesses to start employing people, they don't want to know that you've got a C in history and you've got a D in economics. What they want is they want to know, firstly and foremost, are you a personable person? Are you somebody that they're going to get on with? Are you somebody that's going to fit in with their team?
Kind, fun.
Yeah. But secondly, they want, on the whole, they want to see, they want to hear about your experiences. What have you done? What are you bringing to whatever the job is, the situation? What will you be able to bring to that team? And imagine turning up to those interviews with your portfolio that has tracked you through school, and it doesn't have to stop at school.
Yeah,
it's tracked you through your life at work. And yes, you can have if we're persisting with certificates and school, we can have those things. But what is better to know?
You're just constantly adding to your self-development.
If you want to employ a graphic designer, for instance, or a sign writer, let's take a job like sign writing, right? It's fairly straightforward. Well, this kid who's trying to start out in sign writing got a C in art. What does that tell you about their capacity to write signs? Or would it be better to have an e-portfolio with signs that they've done, or with the potential styles, their graphic styles that they've had use of? And I think that, in practical terms, is more helpful to the work environment, and in terms of children's well-being, which has got to be uppermost in our minds at the moment. As young people have missed 2 years of their normal life. Yeah. And if you're 11 and you've missed 2 years of normal life, that's like nearly 20% of your life. Yeah. It's all right for me, who's now 56, to have missed 2 years of my life. I had 54 beforehand. I had something to go on. Yeah.
What imprint's that going to do to them in the future?
And actually, a kid who was in year 4 when COVID struck, missed year 5 and year 6 of primary school and turned up at year 7, having been to year 4.
Wow! When you put it like that, mind blowing.
Or what about a kid who was in year 9, missed the 2 GCSE years, or was doing it online without that?
That was very messy.
And probably gets to their GCSE tests. You've got one lot of who've had
the most sort of integral, formative periods of their lives.
Yeah. And then they're being asked to do tests after that difficult experience. However well, and schools in lots of ways put on very good online lessons, but it's just not the same, is it?
From the styles that you've just spoke of there, you've got when you went to Canada and their approach and the ideas formulated in your book. It just sounds so much sense to me. This sounds like, why are we not doing this? So let's just imagine, we'll picture someone here, Gove, let's say, or some sharp person that wants to vehemently refute this and say, oh, that's all hocus pocus or fluffy, or this can't work, even though it clearly has in Canada and so on. What would their argument point be to this when they're looking over at you and they can't comprehend what you're trying to...
I think it's probably a philosophical point, isn't it? That when you look at the function of schools, one of them, I suppose, is to make good citizens. Okay, people, and that's a laudable thing. Good citizens are people who follow the rule of law, contribute to their communities
and economy,
and develop the skills that we need for the economy. And how you address that takes on different routes. So, for instance, I'm suggesting that you invest individually in children, in their growing interests, in their growing expertises, in their growing capacities and experiences. Another route, of course, is to instill in everybody a sense of discipline. You know, the idea that if people learn to do what they're told, learn what are the important facts, you know, the privileged facts, and you do that. I mean, when you were asking me earlier about how long did it take me to actually think about the curriculum, that's an important idea, isn't it? I mean, who chooses what is important for children to know? I've contributed to a book that's coming out next year.
Who does? Who the board of examiners? Who?
Well, the government.
Yeah, the
government decides
through
the Department for Education will decide processes around school, and will decide what elements of literature, of history, of geography, of science, are important to know. When actually, you know, a very disempowering question for teachers is, what do kids need to know in 10 years' time? Well, if you put your hand on your heart, you don't really know. Because if you go back 10 years from now...
Judging what I needed to know 10 years ago is very different to what I'm knowing now.
And
an internet.
Now, if you think about your adult life and the things that you do, what of the things that you do did you have any help with at school?
It's just funny to me, yeah.
You will have been offered a basic grounding in being able to read, being able to write, being numerate, being logical, you know, so a subject like science.
And the discipline's a big factor.
Being analytical. And then you will have been sort of herded through things like, you know, self-discipline, which is fine. Things like group work come in again, you know, cooperating, developing relationships, understanding things about yourself. Now, none of those things are written into the curriculum. I mean, while you're busy doing all those things, you're learning about the impact of the Weimar Republic on the people of Germany in the 1930s, right? Which probably doesn't impact a great deal on your life at all.
Not yet.
But maybe we could take a curriculum that's seemingly not of immediate use to you, but the way that we talk about it, the way that we analyse it, the way that we have conversations about it, the way that we develop an interest in that, the way that we suggest the way that the history of German culture might impact on our own, where they've collided and now maybe where they can coexist, is important. I was just going to... no, okay, that's fine. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So with that, we've been on this journey where you were questioning things, then you started going and discovering other ways of being, so you went to Canada and so on. You are at Sheffield Hallam and teaching other teachers, NQTs. How beneficial has that been in the conducting and writing of this book and discovery of teaching?
Well, it's given me the time and space to write a book. For a start, when you're a school teacher, it's pretty much full on every day. You know,
they're not called NQTs anymore, are they? What's the term?
Early career teachers.
Okay.
But the ones that I work with are initial teacher trainees. So they're ITTs. They're the ones that on the course that I work on, they've done a degree in a subject, and they're now doing a 1-year course to get qualified teacher status, which is called a postgraduate certificate in education, a PGCE.
Everything's an acronym now.
Yeah, especially at a university. And the so I'm seeing people who are doing a 1-year course, coming through that course and going off into teaching. So I've been doing that for 9 years now. I would say I've probably, on the back of that, sent about 300 people off, maybe more, to be English and drama teachers.
Wow.
So that's felt like quite a contribution. But it's been an interesting time to do it because, as I say, the nature of society in lots of ways is changing rapidly and outpacing what we're doing in schools. So, for instance, if you take something fairly basic like writing, writing with a pen on paper is probably, school is probably one of the only places that you do that anymore. And the world of business certainly doesn't do that. Your plumber comes round to mend your plumbing, and your bill comes through their phone or through their electronically. Everybody writes electronically now, and children write electronically. The rest of the time they're not in school.
Trying to enlarge books.
Well, yeah, you see babies trying to enlarge books, don't you? But and the actual way that we write is not represented much in schools. Schools are just cottoning on now in some certain circumstances where we need to give children, or children need to have laptops, because that's actually how we write. And I'm not even suggesting that's a good thing, and
it's just what is.
You'll hear people decrying that, I love writing with paper and pen. Well, you may do, but that doesn't make,
go do that.
The world has moved on. I like writing with paper and pen now and again.
To be fair, I still do, but that's for memorising poems and things. If I want to do a song later, I'll always, first of all, it's on notes, and I get all that down, and then I just write it back in form. I can't even think of paper now, words for paper, but I write it back in written form, and that helps me memorise it. Well, that's the only time I'll ever use it. And with all this then, you're at university, and are you hearing commonalities with all these young teachers that encourages you to, okay, I've got a thirst for writing this book now, forget school. They keep saying similar stuff to me, and I need to condense it down into a book so I can help them on this path.
I mean, the book isn't really, I guess it is, who is the audience of this book? There are two audiences for this book. One is teachers, but it's not restricted to young teachers. It's teachers. Yeah. And actually, probably the longer you've been in teaching, the more distant you are from, the ways in which the curriculum is disappearing from children. And then the other audience, and equally important, are young people who want to be self-employed, who want to feel confident, who want to think about the nature of work and the nature of leisure, which, I mean, one of the findings from the interviews with young people was that it's really hard to not be at work.
Yeah.
It's really hard to not be at work because, if you're, and lots of people that I was interviewing were saying that their work is on Instagram. It's where they advertise their wares. It's where interest comes through. So to say to yourself, right, this weekend, we're going to switch off Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, emails. We're not going to look at the website. Is really hard.
Idealistic.
Yeah. Well, it shouldn't be, should it? You should have time when you're at work and time when you're not at work. And actually ring fencing time when you're not at work is one of the things that is discussed in this book as a thing that's important to do. Because otherwise, self-employed work will subsume you completely. There's discussion in there. There's one quotation from a young person in there who says, well, I think of two off the top of my head. One is, I can't have a relationship. I haven't got time for a relationship. And the other one is, I can't be pregnant. I just can't be pregnant.
Wow.
You know, so those ordinary family things, relationship
There's
things.
a lot of pressure on that word "can't."
It's because business work will take you over. Because it's not like somebody else is paying you and you can switch off at 3:30 and let them deal with the problems, or 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whenever you finish. It's you you're chasing the work. If somebody don't get back to you, if you don't get back to somebody, then they've gone somewhere else, you know. And in, you know, again, looking at the idea of writing, one thing that came over about Instagram and you know, electronic forms of presenting yourself is that you get no instruction in school on presenting yourself on Instagram or having a web page. But actually,
it's barely discussed, isn't it?
Those well, no, not at all, not really. Those things are hugely important to the impact that you make. I mean, you know, when we've been on talks, I've mentioned a young lady who has a wedding design company, and I've said, you know, if she's got a wedding design company, you've got a wedding design company, and I have, we're all offering the same product, and the way it's going to be accessed. Instagram, websites, wherever, electronic locations. And how does somebody pick between that young lady and me? They're buying into us, aren't they? They're buying into the way that we've communicated online.
Yeah.
What we've shown about ourselves.
What is your UPS?
Yeah. We are having to, if you excuse the expression, sell ourselves, because actually we've all got the same product.
Yeah.
So I've got to find my niche within that product, and that's something, you know, in developing confidence, in developing networking, developing relationships, being able to manage money, being able to deal with bias. And in particularly the bias against young people, which is one that I hadn't really considered, but was certainly a pattern in what I was being told. Those things get very little consideration explicitly in schools. Now, the first chapter in that book is about confidence and how important it is to be confident. And you know, perhaps the sorriest finding of this book is that was something that young people said they'd had to generate
outside of school
afterwards. You know, I mean, some talked about, you know, going away to on the school trips helped you develop your confidence, or particularly those trips where people go and help a school in Africa or something. And then they come back and they speak to the governors and to parents about it, and just real projects with real outcomes help develop confidence. But the basic setup of schooling, 5 live broadcasts a day, where you sit and make notes, is not empowering. And I mentioned to you before we started one quotation that I'd just like to read, which I thought was really powerful. So this is a young person telling me about schooling. At school, there was always this definiteness about knowledge that turns out to just not be true. Everything always seems so important, and I felt so small, unimportant in comparison. That's not healthy.
No. This is the way it is.
Young people need to engage with truths, with knowledge, with facts, because those things change. What is true, what is factual, changes. We're only as clever as we are.
It's a good saying.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're no cleverer than that, and the world moves on. You know, in 100 years' time, people will wonder, why on earth did people eat animals? Why would you do that? Or why cancer? Why did people? Why did they just take the pill?
Yeah.
And at the minute, we're only as clever as we are.
And it's so important to be definite on all these facts that we're given at this present moment in time.
And if you know, if you find yourself in that circumstance that person was saying there, that
beautifully put,
that knowledge seems so concrete, you know, and it seems so fixed and set. And then imagine being a child that can't do that knowledge.
Yeah.
So
alien.
If you go to mathematics and you can't do it.
It's the most isolating place when you're sat in that classroom.
Where do you take that information that you can't do maths? You take
directly towards
you. You take it in and you add it to what you know about yourself.
And you're looking around, everyone's writing down, they all get it. You're looking to see if you can capture a bit of their work, and it's so isolating.
I mean, I know from working with trainee school teachers, or let's go back to A-level class, right?
Yeah.
A-level class, you've come back after doing your GCSEs, most kids have left, and you're just left with the ones who did really well, you know, have got good scores, and you're sitting in there looking round this class of 12 people, and I'm telling you now, 80% of those people are looking round thinking, oh, but he's really clever in here and I'm not. And I get the same thing with trainee teachers who, to be fair, trainee teachers have done well in their education. They've got their GCSEs, they've got A-levels, they've gone to university and they've got a degree. They've got to have all of those things. You've got to have GCSE, English and maths at a good score to be allowed to train as a school teacher, and you've got to have a degree. So they've spent their academic lives being really good. And then they get to be a school teacher, and suddenly, in lots of instances, they're not very good at something. How do you cope if you've always been good at something, and now you're in a situation?
It's so fascinating.
Where, for the first time in potentially your young life, you can train to be a teacher when you are, well, let's say 18, 21. When you're 21, 22 years old,
you're hit with a hurdle.
You're hit with a hurdle that actually these lessons that I'm designing aren't always working, and the kids don't always do what I want them to do, and they're not grasping the ideas, or they're not behaving in ways that's supportive of learning. And confidence.
I was just going to mention the confidence there. Okay.
Takes a big knock. And confidence is such a key. Imagine being a self-employed person with no confidence. Those things, they just clash against each other.
How do you help people in that position that, say, have followed the curriculum, done really well, accelerated through, and complied and been fairly obedient in all of this, and learnt obedience?
That's a big part of their journey on that in that year, is that, I mean, one of the things they have to learn is that teaching isn't a finite thing. It's not, you will do a year's training and then you'll do 2 years as an early career teacher, and suddenly you'll reach this state of being called being a teacher. Yeah. And then you can just
this
plateau.
Level of respect it warrants then, and it's like, this is it now.
And now you can plateau for 40 years while you have a teaching career, or any other career for that matter. That it is a constant process of adaptation to the needs of society, to the needs of children. But developing that sense of confidence in a school setting, well, I think we have to write confidence into the curriculum. It has to be an outcome. At the minute, it might happen. You might become confident, or you might not. And, you know, if you think about those kids who sit in a classroom who get A star at everything but never talk to anyone, they're brilliant academically and writing, but
what they lack
is the ability to talk to people and feel comfortable in doing that. That's going to be a real drawback, however many A stars you've got.
Yeah.
And I think it needs writing in. So let's take any curriculum. History. There's parts of history that we want to teach. But while we're doing that, how will we support people to be confident? Can we get them researching? Can we get them analysing? Can we get them talking? Can we get them doing presentations? Can we get them doing group work? Can we get them publishing something, which might be a talk, or it might be a piece of writing, or it might be something else.
But to put something out there in the ether takes a lot of confidence. If you've got a book out there with a piece of your writing in, you don't know who's accessing that at any point. So
I always tell English teachers the best way to improve anybody's ability to speak or anybody's ability to write is to give them a real reason to do those things. Give them a real audience, a real purpose, and a real context. So they're going to speak. They're going to speak to these people, and it matters. And this is where they're going to do the speaking. And to think about those things, that's the number one way to improve anybody's ability to write or speak, is to give them a reason to do it.
Because I think, and we speak about this, but the teacher sees themselves as that's enough of a purpose. They're writing it for me, I'm going to be marking it. But kids aren't thinking, oh yeah, the teacher, how am I going to make this?
The transaction between a teacher and a kid, the teacher's not really an audience.
No.
The teacher's the person who corrects the work and says what's right and wrong with it.
Yeah.
That's not an audience. An example of an audience would be, being sent home to ask your grandfather what was the best day of his life. or any member of your family, whatever, your auntie.
So a loved one.
Yeah. Ask them what was the best day of your life. Bringing that information back, writing it up as a non-fiction or as a story, and then giving it back to that person.
Yeah,
that's a real purpose, a real audience, and a real context.
Yeah, the writing dramatically shifts and changes in that way.
There's a momentum there, isn't there? There's a reason to write, and when you've achieved well there, your confidence goes up a notch. But what I'm saying is, in the history curriculum, in the English curriculum, in the science curriculum, when we're looking at the outcomes, some of them will be about knowledge. So science, I guess, is a subject there is lots of facts, there's lots of knowledge that you need to have. There's analytical approaches you need to have. But we've got to make room for mistakes. We've got to make room for confidence. It's got to be okay to make a mistake, which is not something that's all that apparent in schooling at the minute. We're driving kids from A to B. You don't know something, now you do know something, and we're going there by the shortest route.
Yeah.
And we're going to be right all the time. And that's a poor preparation for adult life, being right all the time. I mean, you might know some people who are right all the time, and they're probably not.
I think they think that. So while you're building this book, what is the first starting process of it? Are you just going around to meet many, many young people and ask them questions?
I asked them, in the book I list all the questions that I asked. But the three starting ones are, what was good about school? What have you got from it? What was no good about school? What got in your way? And what have you had to learn for yourself afterwards?
Very, very good questions.
And then, those are the base questions. And then, as we do more and more interviews, more interesting questions. I mean, those are kind of factual, anecdotal answers are what we were getting from there. But then a whole, just people take you off when they're beginning, they take you off in different directions. So I would then start opening up to questions like, at what age did you feel like an adult? Or what fulfills you? What makes you feel alive? From where or from whom do you normally seek advice? What concerns do you have? How do you measure success?
Wow.
Questions like that, just so we can get a sense of where these people are. And then the chapters, which I'll just give you the headings to very briefly. The chapters are the patterns that kept coming up over and over again. Confidence, number one. Digital proficiency and the need for it. If you're going to join in with the adult world, you've got to be digitally proficient. Making connections, that sense of networking. Money management, kids just no idea about money. And of course, you'll have noticed, and it's been accelerated through COVID, the disappearance of money, actual money, coins and notes. I haven't had any for days, and I've not needed any. I've been going to shops and cafes and ordering things online perfectly happily without any money in my pocket.
I'd love to say on the money management, me being in business now, I labelled myself at school, stupid in all areas, but particularly English and maths. Maths was the one, bottom set, I'm stupid, I'm thick, don't put anything in front of me with numbers. And even my grandma sort of gave a bit of gravitas to that. She's like, you can't do maths. But that was playful to her, but maybe to a kid, that goes in differently, quite malleable. But I really enjoy money management now, and sorting out all my finances and looking out how we're going to save for a van and how we're going to feed ourselves, and if we're going to get food in for the month, how that can save money here and there. I love maths now, and it's just really interesting outside of school, the money management factor, and I feel quite good at maths. I'm adding it all together, and I found such a big enjoyment there. And it only took a simple thing where it mattered to me. Everything now is important. I've got a family, I've got everything to think about. If you could introduce that into the curriculum, into maths, I promise you, just having that purposefulness within it, it changes everything.
I mean, your audience is yourself.
Yeah. And my daughter and Chrissy, obviously.
Yeah.
But
you've got a genuine audience purpose, and the context is
it's literally everything we spoke about in this podcast today, and that one small thing. I'd always buried my head for money. I didn't know what was in my account for. Do you know, years we were going out together, travelling round, I'd be going out with you, and I'd be just like tapping my card on contactless and just waiting for it to stop. And one day I was like, I don't know when this is going to end.
Well, that's truly important. I think there's a quotation from an economist in here saying that we are headed towards a financial disaster, which maybe that COVID has again sort of speeded up, because we're not teaching children about value in schools in the volume that they need it. So yeah, money management's on there. Happiness and well-being keeps coming up. Relationships, developing your talents. Actually, really interesting the way that young people were talking about their ability to make decisions, be creative, extend what they know. I mean, that goes against that sense I was talking about, that there is a plateau where you've become a teacher and all you've got to do is repeat. It just isn't true. And it's not going to be true in any walk of business, is it? And you particularly at the moment, as artificial intelligence is automating so many functions. So, for instance, Belper, where I live, is just about to lose its last physical bank. Bank manager used to be the job in a town, didn't it?
Yeah, that was the aim, wasn't it?
If you're a bank manager, you need to think about, right, what are the skills I've got, and where am I going to redivest them? Because the bank manager is disappearing. Obsolete. It's a disappearing thing. Estate agency, lots of the legal profession. That's kind of shrinking down. The medical profession, the requirements are shrinking down in certain areas and growing in others. And, the world is developing. So what is required and what isn't required isn't a fixed thing. And something that seems like it's needed now may very well not be needed at all. Think about 50 years ago, cameras. If you ran a company making film, you were probably quite happy, making a nice watch, Eastman, Kodak, making plenty of money doing that. they've had to adapt because
these DCLRs and
cameras don't have film.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. You know, and actually the nature of photography has changed, hasn't it? You know, from when I was your age, you only took pictures at weddings or on holidays for important things and to create memories. I took photographs because I wanted a record of a time and a place, whereas now people take several photos a day, delete most of them, send them to people, then delete them.
So it's quite a big theme in this book, adaptability.
It is. We've got developing your talents, covers that, making decisions and being creative, being ethical. I was very heartened at the range of people who are talking about, yes, they're going to run a business, but it's going to be ethical in its decisions. They talked about qualifications, and I put that chapter in, I put the word qualifications in inverted commas because of the limit of your school qualifications.
Sorry, just that ethical one.
Yep.
Can you just anecdotally speak of any of the businesses or business owners you spoke to that are trying to incorporate that in their business?
Okay, let's go back to the lady who's doing the wedding design company, and she decided that one of the best, if you do wedding design, you're working in an area where there are other things going on. So at weddings we have locations, hotels maybe. So you've got hotel owners, you've got maybe musicians who are on the wedding circuit, you've got photographers who are maybe on the wedding circuit, you've got wedding design people like the person we're talking about, etc., etc. So she decided in her local area to set up a network, a once a month meeting of up to about 100 people to discuss ways forward.
What a lady.
And as part of that, she told me she insists with either caterers or hotels that we don't use plastic straws, that we use recyclable materials. If we're going to use, you know, so in a wedding where it's a picnic wedding, where, you know, each of the table get a picnic basket, right? Potentially that could be full of a right load of unrecyclable bits and, you know, plastic knives and forks and what have you. That everything be compostable, for instance. Also buying, this is other people as well, buying materials from people who are not affiliated to, you know, a big business that is deemed to be backed by, you know, difficult owners, we'll say, to be generous. But that sense of being ethical, of not disturbing the planet, of putting back into the community in certain instances.
Do you think the world's grown conscious enough of that, and the consumers? Because obviously for us this sounds ace, and for business owners that's great, but sometimes then there's more cost upon that, and then people always, or not people always, some people will gravitate to the lowest cost. But
they will, but also I think it's one of those costs that might come back to you in the end. You know, that if people know you're an ethical company, people will buy into that.
Yeah, I was hoping that that's what people are aiming for nowadays, and this is more of a consensus.
I mean, the awareness
mindsets.
of climate change, of affiliated to that, you've got migrations of people, aren't you? You know, that's causing difficulties with things like nationalism. But on the other hand, that sort of localism, ethical approach to the production of goods and services is certainly something that was coming through time and again on here. And then on the flip side of that, the last one on there was discrimination, which is young people not being taken seriously, young people not being paid on time because they're young and it doesn't matter. And that was interesting to me, because when people started talking about discrimination of various kinds, you know, my mindset was about race, it was about gender, But actually, it was about being young and being
ageism.
Yeah, there are some really nice companion books in a series called Provocations. One of which is called The War Against the Old, and one is called The War Against the Young. They're really nice companion books. I forget the name of the author, but quite enlightening. You know that you've got this, that you've got the working populace, and then you've got putting the old out to seed, and you've and got keeping the young down. And I think this is partly economics, but it's hard being a young. It's much harder being a young person in terms of money these days. You know, when I trained to be a school teacher and got a job, I could immediately afford a mortgage. I could immediately buy a car. And most young people just don't have that. You know, the sense of having a mortgage is so far removed.
Overwhelming thought for me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
to
Many
to
other
most
young
people
yeah.
in this 20 to 30-year-old bracket that I was looking at in the book, it seemed to me that the only model where you could buy a house sort of en masse is obviously, you know, if you're going to the bank of mom and dad. But outside of that, the only model that I saw repeated was where you got together with your school sweetheart and the pair of you were working and you stayed in the same town that you'd always lived in, and you were basically replicating your parents' life.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's anything particularly wrong with that. I'm just saying that was about the only economic model that would work, where you perhaps, you know, live with parents and then eventually had enough of a pot between you to go and do that. But even having a partner is harder work these days when young people are living in their parental homes into their 30s in lots of instances. How can you be adult? How can you become adult in your childhood bedroom? I left home to go to university and never went back. And you know, the potentially people who had a job could either rent somewhere or they could have a mortgage at a much younger age than young people are able to now.
It's crazy. I mean, it's just removing asset, isn't it? People aren't owning. I watched a video recently. Do you know when the world leaders get together? Somebody just shared it up, and one of them said, "You will own nothing, and you will be happy." And that just gave me this real like hollow sense. I feel very safe and in power. Like I own these buses now. I've built up enough money, and we've got asset between us. And if anything does fall, we know we've got stuff that can stabilise us. But I just think more and more young people don't have any asset now, and they're all in debt. I think debt needs to be abolished, like education and going into university.
Well, I mean, debt's not going to be abolished.
No.
It's going to be the way that we all are. You know, I guess I'm probably not in debt, but I am on a day-to-day basis. You know, but if we cashed up, I'm in credit. But it's actually living with debt is a trial in itself, isn't it? You know, and if you look at how
constantly suffocating.
If you look at, you know, some people have worked all their lives and never owed anybody anything. I've worked marvellous. I wish I was in that bracket, but they've never owed anybody. They've paid every dollar that's come through their hand, every pound that's come through their hand.
Mr. McCorber style.
They earned before they spent it,
Yeah.
right? Imagine being a child of those parents who've never owed anybody anything, and presently the government say, right, you want to go to university, right? That's cost £9,000 tuition fee, and then your living expenses, etc. That's probably going to be another 9. We're looking at £18,000 a year. 3-year course, what's that? £54,000 of debt. And you've come from the family where nobody has ever owed anybody anything.
What sort of risk is that to go and take, to go and get educated?
It's a risk. I mean, you know, long term, people who have a university qualification over a lifetime earn a considerable amount more.
What about the ones that don't?
Than the ones that don't.
Yeah.
But if you, you know, this is another sort of class control in a sense, you know. If I'm a working class man, a woman who has worked for every penny that I've spent, I'm not going to be happy with my kids taking on £9,000 of debt.
No.
Even though, you know, it feels like that. It's not really that kind of a debt. It's an income tax, isn't it? Because you don't pay it until after university, and it's a percentage out of your salary. So, to a certain extent, it doesn't work really in the way that loans work. You don't start immediately paying it off with interest. But it's a difficulty. It's a difficulty, and as I say, it's unlooked for, but it is a social control.
So, in the time that you wrote this book, and the changes that we're seeing in the world now, do you feel like we're going in a good trajectory at the moment in sort of just what you're witnessing?
I would say we're at, everything has changed, and that there are different concepts of what do we do about that. So what do we do about a world that is changed? We can go try to take it back to where it came from, which strikes me as a poor idea, because the world that we had ended up with a chaos. So going back to that world doesn't seem overly bright. That's like banging his head off a wall, isn't it? And expecting not to be hurt the next time.
The only thing constant's change.
So if we ain't going back, we're going forward.
Yeah.
And if we're going forward, what I'm hopeful of is you know, we're seeing things happen that we couldn't conceive of. Right? So for instance, we've got an energy crisis at the minute, and people are being given £400. Everybody's being given £400. That's kind of that sort of communistic social trend is happening under a Conservative government, because frankly poor people are so poor now that they've got to be propped up. You've got to prop up the bottom, which is not a Conservative idea.
If you have more winners, you win together.
And my worry is, you know, we've got a chance now. We're coming out of COVID. We've got a chance to make things different, but will we go far enough? Will we make them different enough? So if you take schooling, for instance, at the minute, schools are focused on getting kids back in good order, returning them to civic life, which they've been in their houses, right? Whether they've been doing their school lessons online or not. They've been in their houses, and they're coming back to civic life. They're coming back to routines, back to schooling. And that's right and proper that we do that, you know, and schools are addressing that in different ways. Some are going through a discipline route, some are going through a well-being route, you know. But there comes a point where we now have an opportunity, because in other areas of society, radical changes are coming about because they've needed to come about. Whilst we're thinking in these radical ways, can we apply that to the way that we educate our citizens? Can we apply new ways of thinking? So, can I just read to you one page from
Please do, yeah.
this book? There are 4 little sequences called Future School.
Is the book audio at all? Have you done an audio version of it yet? Oh, mate.
No.
That's got to be done.
I think people need to buy a few more copies before you get
Okay,
onto it.
and where can they get that from?
Amazon. I've got an Amazon page.
Forget school, Amazon.
Yeah,
in the link below, guys.
Or from Crown House, wherever. Okay, Future School 1. All right, so this is in the voice of a young person who's going to what I call school in the future. This morning, our team is meeting in town at the Library Resource Centre. It's my turn to be the team leader, and I've booked a meeting room from 9 until 10 a.m. The team is made up of children from my local area. We no longer have a physical school, but I meet many more peers than I would have done sat in a classroom. Today's team have opted into this project on the environment, which is one of the core strands of the curriculum, the environment. We only have the meeting room for an hour, so I need to get prepared in advance in order to get everyone out and about quickly. We're working on a project that will be recorded in our individual portfolios. We will all leave school with an online portfolio that documents the projects and initiatives that we've been involved in. Exams have long since been abolished. Our teacher notes the amount of time we've invested in different aspects of our education and the level of competence we've developed. They look at things like self-determination and confidence alongside the learning that we do. The portfolio also features examples of the work that we've produced, including evidence recorded as text, image and sound. When we're looking for work, the online portfolio can easily be edited and adapted to demonstrate the potentially useful experiences and expertise that we have. During my meetings with my mentor, it was noted and added to my portfolio that I have a growing interest in business and environmental issues. The portfolio software is mindful of this when thinking about allocating the experiences that I will have at school. Whilst the programme is developing my foundational knowledge of word and number, it's also building my expertise in the areas of most interest to me and in which I'm proving most adept. As physical writing has become redundant, there's no longer a problem with standard spelling or presentation. Artificial intelligence has made this an obsolete consideration. My written texts are spoken to the online portfolio and the grammatical and presentational features are arranged for me. The technology makes suggestions about sentences and ideas in my text with which I either agree or disagree. I talk to the portfolio about the positioning of text and images, and it moves these around at my direction. I also work with the portfolio to make a multimedia presentation to introduce today's project to my new colleagues. One of the strands that we're developing is concern for our local environment. We're thinking about our town, and in particular with this project, the natural world in our environment. This morning the team are assembled for a briefing. We're researching the reasons why bees are disappearing from our locality. We want to find out reasons why this might be happening, and we want to promote ways in which we can support the growth of the bee population locally. This idea came from one of the team members and was agreed by us all as a worthy project.
That's a beautiful way to do it, because everything that we've just spoke about in the whole podcast is in that section of the book.
If you think about self-determination and confidence, that person's had to book the meeting room, organise a team, prepare for that, think about what it is that they want to do. They're also, on an individual basis, they're thinking about what they want to add to their portfolio.
I'm just thinking how much education and learning in its current state puts a ceiling above you, because this is what you're learning, this is what we need, and a lot of people put their sights to that. Okay, I can hit that quota, but for people like this, you're hurtling yourself into, and then I can add this to my portfolio and this, and I'm going to move over here, and it shows how much tenacity you've got inside of you.
Just picking up on what you said there, this is what you're going to learn, and this is what we need, are actually, to my mind, becoming a little bit separate. Business is not telling schools this is what we need. we're not developing the skills perhaps that we want. And the other thing to say about that is when you're talking about putting a ceiling on, it's about there being a curriculum for everybody. And actually, I didn't finish my thought earlier about the book that I've contributed to that's coming out next year called Square Pegs, which is about those children for whom school's not working. And I think I introduced this particular chapter, which is about assessment, talking about a young man who knows everything about ferrets.
Yeah.
He knows when they're born what sex they are. He knows how to look after them. He knows what you need to feed them, how to shelter them. He sees potential illnesses in them. He knows at what age they are, as adults, they go vicious. He knows everything about ferrets. Where is that going to be acknowledged on the curriculum? Absolutely nowhere. Where is his encouragement, given that it's, teachers probably don't even know about that. It's a hobby. But it's a hobby that might well turn into a career. A bit like the young man who went to school or after school developed an interest in poetry and an interest in filming and an interest in making podcasts.
I like him.
Where is any of that going to be nurtured in school? At the minute, it isn't. With these project-based things, perhaps it would. Perhaps somebody like Mikey who wants to do a podcast or who wants to do some filming, there is a role for Mikey in that project with the bees.
Because in essence, with the teachers you're working with, you have eyes in many different schools. Do you see this way of thinking more susceptible? Is it being introduced?
Teachers are very good people, and they know. Teachers know exactly the limitations of what they're being asked to do. I think at the moment, yes, there are signs that creativity might be something that's being called for in schools, in the curriculum. We have to develop confidence. We've got to move to digital writing. We have to. Otherwise, it's ridiculous. Getting people to write with paper and pen is it's just there because it's always been there, and it's cheap. And at the minute, the government doesn't have the money or is not prepared to invest money in the form of writing that children are going to come across in their adult lives.
And allow change, but you've got the heads of schools and these teachers. I suppose we're talking to lots of them, and afterwards you get this aftermath of a glow because they're coming and saying, you're saying what we want to say, or you're just speaking our language. So you do feel this hum and this buzz and this feeling of people want this. People are actively seeking.
I mean, I think one of the, I think maybe is it written on the front of this book? I mean, but why, the subline to this book, the title is Forget School, and then it says why young people are succeeding on their own terms and what schools can do to avoid being left behind. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion that schools will get left behind, but they will. If they don't start thinking about the life that children are going towards.
So is one of your neurosis or fears that it's going to tighten the old way, and unfortunately good people and the teachers you kind of want in those spaces and facilities are going to drop out?
We're in that space now.
Okay.
We're in that space now. Is it going to, as we just said, are we going back? Are we going forward? And if we're going forward, are we going forward enough? This is a window. It's an opportunity where everything's up for discussion. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about
then?
Right?
Yeah.
There's just a little moment in time where things can change, where we can think differently about the economy, health, society. Will we change enough? Will we take this little moment before things settle again into a steady pattern? Who knows?
Well, mate, we've got lives to live, but before we go, you've got a poem in that book.
Okay.
I mean, of course, when you gave me the book, I went straight for the poem. Just wanted to test you, see what your poetry's like, and it's really, really good. So, could you read us out on that?
Yeah, I've had one poem published before when I was a university student in a magazine, but I think this is my second published poem, and it's only been published because I hid it in the back of the book. I hid it between the index and the referencing, so all the boring bits. I hid my poem. So it takes the idea of roads and paths and makes a distinction, a sort of metaphorical distinction between them. So, the speed and the way that a road cuts through things, and the way that a path is perhaps a slower, more thoughtful route. Anyway, here we go, short and sweet. I see that paths are not roads this early morning. Roads cut through the land in a hurry to be off somewhere else. They ignore the left and the right of things. So I step off and look around, searching among the green and gold for our leafy ancestral pathways, roots worn clean and furrowed deep in the earth by our makers. I have learnt this early morning, as I stepped out along one such happy path, that these paths have time for me and show me a world that is still there. And I have felt this early morning, these past existences watch and approve. They are quiet whisperings of what I should always have understood. They're willing me on, though the path is new and the world so changed.
I mean, if you're gonna finish your podcast, that's the way to do it. That went straight in here, man. And
Excellent.
I've really, really enjoyed this podcast with you, and I thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me back on.
You've propelled me
great.
and inspired me to want to go out and do more talks with you. So let's get on the mission.
Let's get on it.
Yeah, we're ready to go, mate. I feel revitalised. So thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm going to do my bit. Guys, you've been a part of the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. I'm going to leave you on this. I always do. I always will. And I think this will create a better world. Just be nice to one another, you beautiful set of buggers. See you later.